a very warm welcome to this residence. It is fantastic to see so many of you here this evening to help us celebrate International Women's Day. And we're going to do that by exploring the legacy of Lady Mary Montagu, whose portrait is hanging on the wall there. She was the wife of the then ambassador to the Sublime Porte in Istanbul, Edward Montagu. And she lived in Turkey for just 2 years, but it had a very important impact both on her life and her legacy. And Lady Mary was a feminist before that word was even invented. She was a scientist before women were allowed to be scientists. And she was a true cultural and diplomatic force, fascinated by exploring the lives and the culture of women in the Ottoman Empire, and writing a series of legendary letters back home, which are collected in a book which you can buy on Amazon. To help celebrate her legacy, we've got 2 very renowned women with us here tonight. 3, counting our ambassador, Jill Morris, online. We have I'm delighted to welcome Professor Dr. Zara Sayers, who is an award-winning structural biologist, and according to the BBC in 2019, one of the 100 most influential women on the planet. And we also have Jo Willett, film producer and writer, who has given us all a huge gift by her work to research and publish Lady Mary's biography. I have been looking forward to this evening's discussion for several weeks now, and I'm delighted that we're getting started. I can't think of anything very much more important to discuss today than the role of women in science, culture, and diplomacy in the UK, in Turkey, and globally. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to Dr. Peter Cherry for facilitating the discussion. But before we move on to that, I would like to formally introduce His Majesty's Ambassador to Turkey, Jill Morris, CMG. She can't join us in person. She's in Istanbul this evening, but she's going to say a few words. Jill, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Wendy, and good evening. Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm very sorry that I can't be with you in Ankara in person this evening. I am in Istanbul, have engagements here, but it's wonderful to see you all there in the ballroom at the residence. And of course, welcome to those who, like me, are joining on Zoom. And thank you also from myself to the British Council, to the British Institute, and to our very special guest speakers, Professor Sayers and Jo Willett. So I'm sorry not to be able to see you on this occasion, but I hope to in the future. So speaking from Pera House, our consulate in Istanbul, really walking around the grounds today and thinking about the event this evening, it really got me thinking about Lady Mary. These are the very grounds where in the 18th century, the embassy, it was our embassy at that time. Now, of course, it's our consulate general. And I was thinking it was quite easy to imagine her walking around the gardens, walking around and thinking, preparing for her writing. I first came across Lady Mary and her writings, particularly the letters, many years ago, when I was aspiring to, it's a dream to be one day ambassador in Turkey. And of course, I went back to her work before taking up my appointment last year. And I salute her regularly. Her portrait, just to your right there. Remarkable woman for any time, but particularly for her time. Her travels around Turkey, she's a true explorer with an open heart and an open mind, writer and poet. And as the first British woman ambassador in Turkey, the first in the 450 years of our diplomatic relations, I'm very proud and very honoured to have that position, and Lady Mary has been an inspiration for me. I just wanted to say a few words as this event is part of our engagement to celebrate and highlight International Women's Day, is the approach of our foreign policy towards the empowerment of women and girls. The empowerment of women and girls around the world is an integral part of our approach to foreign policy, security policy, development policy. We have an international strategy that is based around educating girls, empowering women and girls, and ending gender-based violence. And each embassy around the world mainstreams those objectives into their business plan, into their activity. And of course, we are able to adapt it depending on the circumstances of the country that you are in. But we are absolutely committed around the world in partnership with our host governments, with the organisations and the agencies active in this area to play our role and where we can lead to support women's freedom, empowerment and involvement in economic life. As part of that, we think it's really important, I think it's really important to celebrate and showcase women's success. And we have done a number of initiatives in that area, including recently in Ankara, celebrating Women in Science Day, very relevant, of course, for Lady Mary, with a group of women researchers from Turkey who've been collaborating for quite some time with the UK under the Newton Fund. This weekend just gone in Istanbul, we brought together professionals from the UK and Turkey in the fields of sport, recognising the role of women in sport, and the British Council celebrated women in arts and culture at their two-day Women of the World Festival in Istanbul. And of course, with the British Council as the embassy, we continue to champion the role of women in STEM and the importance of full involvement of women in economic life. So Lady Mary's mission was to better understand the lives, the history and the culture of this region. And of course, that's very much at the heart of the work of the British Institute. And I'd like to salute both Jill Caldicott, Director of the British Council, and also Lute from Dr. Lute Vanderput of the BIAA. For the work that they do in Turkey, and we are very proud of the collaboration that we have as the British family in Turkey on these and many other issues. And thank you to Dr. Peter Cherry for moderating today's event as well. And the council, as I said, continues to focus on these areas amongst many others, and the institute continues to build academic networks and collaborations. And I'm sure that what you're going to hear and discuss this evening will reflect the work of both of those important institutions here. So I will leave it there because you want to hear from our star guests this evening. But thank you again, everybody, for gathering for this important discussion. I am sorry that I'm not able to be there in person, but I do hope with many of you in the course of the rest of the year to have the opportunity to reflect with you on Lady Mary and her incredible legacy. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Enjoy the discussion.
Good evening to everyone attending in person and online, and good afternoon to those who are in the UK attending online. So my name is Peter Cherry, and I'm Assistant Director at the British Institute at Ankara. And this event is very close to my heart. I've many fond memories of reading, or teaching, in fact, the letters of Lady Mary Montagu at Bilkent University. I'm very honoured that my former chair is also here this evening, and introducing Turkish students to this extraordinary figure in our shared British and Turkish heritage. And I wanted to start by saying thank you to His Majesty's Ambassador to Turkey, Jill Morris, for that inspiring message. It's an honour to hold such an event under the auspices of the UK's first woman ambassador to Turkey. Now, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu may not have been a diplomat by profession, but as Joe's biography, as I can show here, as Joe's biography shows, she was in some ways a more effective bridge between the UK and the Ottoman Empire than in fact her ambassador husband. Montagu was a passionate proponent of women's inclusion and cross-cultural dialogue. By listening and talking with women from the Ottoman Empire, she was able to learn about inoculation and bring it to the UK, thereby saving countless lives. Her life is an example to all of us committed to both gender equality and to Turkish and British dialogue in the arts, cultures, sciences, and politics. I'm sure she would be delighted in 2024 the UK is represented not only by a woman ambassador, but also a woman deputy ambassador, Wendy Wyver, who is generously hosting us this evening in such an appropriate venue. For those attending in person, as has been mentioned just before, we're actually overlooked by a portrait of Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, painted by Carlo Francesco Rusca in 1739. And that's to our right, left, whichever. It's a question of perspective. To our right. To our right. And we sit below the Montagu suite, where distinguished guests to the embassy can stay. But that's enough from me. We have someone here tonight who can put this into context. So let me introduce Joe Willett. Joe has had an illustrious career as a BAFTA and Emmy award-winning television drama producer. For Brits in the audience, you will know her work on the drama A Rather English Marriage and the much-loved female-fronted sitcom Birds of a Feather. Jo is now a historical biographer, and her work has focused on unearthing and retelling women's stories from the 18th century. The pioneering life of Mary Wortley Montagu, scientist and feminist, is her first book, and as a coincidence, was published during the COVID crisis in May 2020. Jo is now working on a biography of the 18th century Welsh actress Sarah Siddons, which will be published in May, is that right? Mm-hmm. And I emphasise the Welsh because our ambassador is from Wales, so a special link there. Our other speaker is Professor Zehra Sayers. Now, Professor Sayers is a molecular biologist focusing on structural biology. She spent her early career in laboratories in the UK and in Sweden. As the first female staff scientist at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in Hamburg, she was among the pioneers in applications of synchrotron X-rays to structural analyses. Later, she was also instrumental in establishing the use of these techniques in Turkey. She is a founding member of the Engineering and Natural Sciences faculty at Sabancı University, and we're honoured that some people have made the journey from Istanbul to Ankara from Sabancı today. Istanbul to Ankara today. And she served as director of the Foundation Development Programme, core curriculum, and as interim president at Sabancı University. She was the chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the International Synchrotron Radiation Faculty, SESAMI, as it matured from a project to a functional laboratory. Her achievements were recognised with the Rammel Award in 2017, and in 2019 she was among the recipients of the AAAS Science Diplomacy Award, so she's also very much qualified to be talking on the diplomacy side of this event. And indeed, in the BBC list of 100 most influential women in the world. She is an honorary member of the Science Academy Turkey. So, if you'll join me in welcoming Jo and Zehra this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll start with you, Jo. So, Jo, can you tell us a bit about Lady Mary, and why you were inspired to write a biography of her?
Yeah, so Mary was born in 1689
of a noble family, so she was born titled. She didn't inherit that from her husband. Her parents had an arranged marriage, as everybody did in those days, if you're of that class. Her mother died when she was 3, and the children were split up. So she and her sister and her only brother went to live in Thoresby, the family seat in the Midlands. And there, by chance, there was one of the best libraries in Europe. Mary and Frances had governesses who were supposed to teach them how to dance and sew and draw, but they pretended to the governesses that they were reading romances. And in fact, they went into that library and taught themselves Latin and Greek, and basically were self-educated, and also began writing while they were there. And what I always love is that they read books and then they wrote the story from the perspective of a female character in the book, which I still think today is a great idea. When Mary was 20, she met Edward Wortley Montagu, who is over here. He was 31. He was a barrister and a member of Parliament by then, and he fell for her instantly, for her looks and also for her brain. She was friends with his sister. That's how they got to know each other. But it was a bit of a protracted romance. Mary and her friends divided their suitors into heaven, hell, and limbo. And to begin with, Wortley was heaven for Lady Mary. But he started negotiations with her father, and they were both quite stubborn characters. The negotiations rather floundered. So Mary was only young, and after a time, Wortley became limbo for her. She clearly got interested in somebody else. Her father then introduced her to somebody else who he wanted her to marry, an Irish peer called, with the wonderful name of Clotworthy Skeffington. And she took one look at this man and thought, he is hell for me. So Wortley wrote to her suggesting that they elope, and that is what they did. But when you read, there are the Turkish embassy letters, but there are also her selected letters, which give a much broader bit of her life. And you can read the letters she wrote to Wortley. And you can sense, even in those letters, that really they weren't very well suited. He was a man of business, very proudly. And she was not like that. She was someone interested in ideas and feelings. And he writes about the elopement. He says, as soon as you get in the carriage, let's not say a word to each other before we get to the priest, in case we quarrel. And you think, this is not going to go well. But they started married life together. Because they had eloped, her father cut her off financially, and he wasn't as wealthy as her, so they didn't have much money. So they started life outside London to save money. But then Queen Anne died. Both Mary and Wortley were very strong Whigs, and George I, who then became king, promoted the Whig side of things. So Wortley could see the chance to do well. So he came to London, and pretty quickly Mary was bored and she wanted to come to London. They'd had their only son by then, Edward, who I think is in a picture somewhere here. He came to Turkey with them. He was a sickly child, and Mary used to write to Edward about, I wish you took more interest in the fact that I had to take him off to a well to cure some kind of disease he had at that moment. But they left Edward behind, and Mary came to London, and in London she completely blossomed. She became friends with all the great writers and thinkers of the day, William Congreve, the playwright, John Gay, and Alexander Pope, most notably Alexander Pope, the poet. And she began writing with them, and she absolutely blossomed. She was also a courtier at the court of George I. But then disaster struck, and she got smallpox. Now, I have to say to you here, it's important to put smallpox in context. In the 18th century, 1 in 10 people in Europe died from smallpox. It was an extremely serious and very, very vicious disease. And it was above all a disease of children, which is important to understand. So nearly every family had lost somebody to smallpox. It wasn't expected that Mary would survive, but she did. And while she was recovering from smallpox, so she, obviously, as you do with smallpox, she got the terrible scars. She also lost her eyelashes and her eyebrows, so she had what was ever called afterwards by her friend the Wortley stare. Basically, she lost her looks, so there was no chance she'd be a courtier again. And also some poems she had co-written with Pope and Gay had been published, and a woman of her class, it wasn't expected that you publish. So, and these poems are slightly critical of the royal family, so that was also bad. And things weren't going particularly well for Wortley either. He used to work at the Treasury, it wasn't going well. So things looked pretty bad for them at the beginning of 1716. But in 1716, Wortley was offered the chance to be the ambassador. So quickly, to say to you why I was inspired to write the biography, I was in Lichfield Cathedral, and there was a monument to Lady Mary, and I had never heard of her, unlike your ambassador and your deputy ambassador. I didn't know her. And it talked about her interest in smallpox. I was actually looking to write a book about a writer, and my husband said, I can't believe you don't know her. She's that woman who fell out very badly with Alexander Pope, and he wrote those terrible poems about her. And I was so interested, I thought I really should start reading about her. And once I started reading her writing, I couldn't stop. But I wrote the book before COVID, so I had no idea that there would be this extra cachet to do with it. And Mary inoculated her own daughter in April 1721, 300 years before the book was published.
Great. So my next question then, how did Lady Mary Wortley Montagu discover engrafting or inoculation, and what challenges did she face bringing the idea to 18th century England?
Well, we don't know exactly how she discovered the fight against, or inoculation against smallpox. When she had smallpox herself in London, she was treated by Dr. Samuel Garth, and he was a member of the Royal Society. Of course, Mary, as a woman, could never be a member of the Royal Society. But maybe as she lay there, she heard him talk about the fact that there had been a paper given at the Royal Society in the early 1700s about the fact that the Turks inoculated against smallpox. So she may have heard it then. And certainly when she came out to Turkey with Wortley, they brought with them in their party a young Scottish doctor called Dr. Maitland. And it looks like he wanted to come because he had heard about it. By the way, it was very, very unusual for an ambassador to bring a wife. They were always male, of course, always white. They always came alone. But Mary was absolutely insistent she was going to come too. And we do know that she, as the ambassador said, that she dined, she was the first English woman to be invited to dine alone with the wives of the important dignitaries. So probably they talked to her about it then. And it was an open secret. Obviously, it wasn't a secret here. It was a completely well-known thing. As the French ambassador said, in the West, we go to a spa. Here, they're inoculated. We have this wonderful letter she wrote back to her childhood friend, Sarah Chiswell, outlining exactly the process of inoculation. And she had wanted Sarah to come with her, but Sarah's family wouldn't let her come because it was thought to be so dangerous to travel. And very sadly, actually, as a postscript, Sarah Chiswell herself did die from smallpox, uninoculated. And then Mary was brave enough to decide that she and Mr. Maitland and Dr. Timony, who was with them because she had given birth to her daughter Mary, that they would inoculate her son, Edward. That wasn't actually the historic thing she did, because the previous ambassador, Robert Sutton, had also had his two sons inoculated. But even so, Lady Mary had made sure that Wortley was away, he was with the Sultan, not in Constantinople, and then they inoculated Edward, and he came through fine, and she wrote to Wortley, yet again saying, I wish you were more interested in him, and yes, he's doing very well, thank you.
Great. But what about the challenges?
Oh, the challenges, that's right, sorry, yes, the challenges back home, yes. Well, so when she wrote to Sarah Chiswell, she said, if I live to return, I may have the courage to war with the doctors, because she knew that it would be very, very, very controversial. Because doctors could make a lot of money by taking care of people while they had smallpox, even though they actually weren't doing any good at all. They either kept them very, very hot or very, very cold, but actually that did nothing. And inoculation was done by simple, normally illiterate Greek and Armenian women. And so it was basically a folk practice. You didn't need doctors. And when she came back, she came back in 1718. 1719, there was an outbreak, but she didn't dare do anything. She knew it was going to be difficult. But 1721, there was a terrible outbreak. As Dr. Maitland said, it went forth like a destroying angel. And her young niece was killed and a great friend was killed, and she decided she needed to do something. So she wrote to Maitland, he came to see her, and together they inoculated Mary. Maitland was very nervous of it, and he wanted there to be physicians keeping an eye on the whole way through, but she didn't want that. She said that she would allow some physicians to come in once Mary had the spots, because she knew that actually you were infectious from the time that the smallpox pus was introduced to you until you got the spots. You needed to self-isolate. And so some doctors came, and also some ladies and persons of distinction, and they, we believe, must have told Princess Caroline about it, and that's how the cause was taken up. But there was a lot of, at the time, a lot of dislike of the press against the process. The church didn't like it because clerics said, but what you're doing is you're making a healthy person ill, which sounds quite like our worries about COVID and vaccination. Also, it was seen to be a Whig thing, and it was party political. The Tories didn't like it. There was a lot of anti-German stuff, because the royal family were German, and a lot of anti-Turkish stuff. So she was extremely brave to keep going with it.
Fantastic. And it's interesting as well that it's really something that she takes from women as well. So she's learning the practice from women.
Absolutely.
So yes.
It's a female thing, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that brings me to a question for you then, Zehra. So do any of the challenges that Lady Mary Wortley Montagu faced in terms of the kind of negative press, do any of these resonate, you think, with women scientists today?
Well, what do you think?
Well,
definitely, I would say. Certainly, we have come a long way. There are ways of doing that. But there are a lot of factors that are still present in the society, in the academia, and in different platforms that work against women, I think. And one of them is, to my mind, there is a lot of implicit bias. You know, even I, when I'm buying a present for a little girl, I may go and buy something pink rather than blue, you know, why? And similarly, in terms of professions, if a female electrician comes to my house, I may think, yeah, let's see, you know. Okay, I'm not as bad, but this is the implicit kind of bias that exists in the society. So there is a lot of work that tries to remove this, especially through education, through curricula, through introducing certain elements into the schools. But this has to keep going because we have this, and it has to start all the way from the family and towards higher levels. So that is one of the things. And the other thing is, I think women still do not have equal opportunity for education. Especially, I can say this in Turkey. When you think about it, there is the illiteracy level is about 1%. But of that 1%, illiterate women are 6% and men are 1%. You know, so, 3% actually, there is illiteracy, and of that, 1% is males, 6% is female. So that shows that you are already starting from quite a few steps behind men. So this, I think, is something that needs to be worked on. And the other point is credit and recognition. It takes quite a bit of effort to recognize women compared to men. And it's not only because their numbers are lower, but men support men. Yeah. This is maybe a simple way of saying this, but if a whole interview panel is male, they're highly unlikely to come up with a female candidate, even if the person has worked their way up, all the way up to the interview, they're highly unlikely to choose her. So to my mind, these are still factors that we are facing. I mean, women like myself, we are privileged because we grew up in environments which helped us and which nurtured us, which made life easier for us. But for a lot of women, not only in Turkey, I think, but also in Turkey, they're having a difficult time.
Absolutely. But in your opinion, then, why have women been underrepresented in the sciences specifically? It's obviously coming from biology. And is there hope? Do you think to what extent this might be changing at all?
Well, first of all, I did already say some of the things that we're facing today are really causing this underrepresentation. But there are policies, active policies, which initially I was against policies which promoted women, but later on, as I got older and got more contacts in my professional life, I realized that this was maybe necessary and useful, as long as those people had the merit. They needed an extra push to increase the number of women in certain professions, and certainly this is the case in STEM. I think there are a lot of policies, awareness that is being created, which helps to overcome this. But we have to work more. And the other is role models. Lady Mary is a very nice role model. And I noticed that in the recent years, there are more and more female Nobel laureates in STEM field and in medicine. But this took quite a bit of time. You know, this is after maybe 70s, 80s that women, you hear more female names among Nobel Prize winners. And I think, of course, it also takes some time for women to be trained and to come to positions where they can be leaders and then get these awards. But I think, I'm impressed recently that there are more female Nobel laureates, and there are a lot of silent women, again, that you don't hear about, but who are at high positions in academia in the US and in other countries in the UK. They are coming up, I think, now. The work is giving its fruits, I think. It's been a long journey for people like yourself who have worked on this for many years and promoted these. But now it's sort of coming up, and slowly it's picking up, I think, yeah.
Excellent. Can I ask, actually, just as an added, so you mentioned Lady Mary Montagu as a figure, an inspiring figure. To what extent is she known about in Turkey, would you say?
Well, again, I may not be the right person to answer this question, because in my household, people deal with literature, and they sort of, there are several occasions in which Lady Mary was mentioned. But I don't think she's well known. I don't know. I mean, we can ask some people who are more in the field how much they think that Lady Mary is known. But I doubt that she's. I don't know. No. No.
What would you say about her fame in the UK? Do you think she's?
I'm hoping she's a bit more famous now, because I've been banging her
You've
drum
been
quite loudly. But I do feel very strongly here, because I think this is a fantastic story of Anglo-Turkish relations.
Yes.
And I feel strongly there should be something permanent. I mean, when I went to the Science Museum in Constantinople, in Istanbul, when I was researching, there was just nothing on her at all, and I thought there really should be something here.
Yeah.
So I challenge you all to try to get that changed. I'll gladly help in any way I could.
Great. So let me also both ask you both a question. So talking about Mary Montagu as an extremely forward-thinking person for the 18th century, I wanted to say or ask what advice you both would have for women building careers in culture, also in science and in diplomacy today.
She was in all three. Well, I'm
Yes.
going to answer these in terms of Lady Mary, and 5 attributes I think she had that I think are very important for today. Firstly, she was very brave, and I really think that's very, very important for people today. Don't be timid. Don't be put down by the men who might tell you they know a lot more than you. Be brave. Secondly, she was rigorous. She followed things through. So she didn't just inoculate Edward, she inoculated Mary, even though she knew it was going to be difficult. And again, I think that's very important. Thirdly, make sure you get the credit. Hans Sloane, the royal physician, wrote about inoculation. He was a bit wary of it, but he went with it eventually. But he credited Wortley and just happened to mention Lady Mary on the side. And that was finally put right. About 20 years later, within her life, he did accept that actually it was really her who had done it all. And also, within her lifetime, she got the credit for helping women stay beautiful, not for saving the lives of ultimately millions of people. She was a health pioneer, not really a beauty pioneer. Fourthly, be resolute. She knew it was going to be controversial, but she did it. And make sure you do that. And fifthly, don't be scared of making enemies. Lady Mary said every day for the rest of her life she regretted having done it, but she still did it. And she and her daughter used to go in a carriage to aristocratic households to inoculate everybody, from the lord of the manor to the smallest servant. And the daughter talks about how their carriage would be jeered at as they went by, and people used to say that Lady Mary was an unnatural mother, and there would be significant shrugs from people. But she didn't mind. She carried on doing it. And again, I think that's a great lesson for all of us.
Fantastic. So for you, Zehra, advice for younger women or women building careers in science and diplomacy?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Joe and say, first of all, don't give up. If you believe in something, stick to it and go along with it. Another thing I would say is don't be afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are very important. Mistakes are the things that take you from one step to the other to a higher level. So that's okay. If you make mistakes, there's no problem. You can always put it right. You can always do something different. You can always learn something, because mistakes really teach us things. And I think this is very important. Don't be timid and make mistakes. Be brave. Keep going. And sometimes, self-confidence. I think this is very important. Once you know something, once you know it feels right to you, and you have grounds for knowing that this is correct, then you can have your self-confidence and ignore the rest of the world. They can do whatever they want. Now, another thing I would say is have men on your side. Educate them. Educate them. That's very important. They need to be educated. And look at mothers who have sons, you know. They are the ones who are bringing up those children. They are the ones who are bringing up those men. Those guys are going to be men at some time, and they're going to take decisions. So educate them. I think one should not miss any opportunity to educate men in the proper way, and get them to support you also at the same time, because it's 50-50. We need them, they need us. So we have to do this thing, I think, to my mind, together. So those are my points.
Excellent. And I feel I can't let that go without saying that my mum is actually on Zoom at the moment. So, hi, Mum.
Very good.
So I'd like to open the floor now for questions from our in-person audience. Is anyone, any questions first off? Yes, sorry, yes, please. And please introduce yourself as well.
I'm Hülya Adak from Sabancı University as well. Many thanks for this fantastic panel. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu was actually a part of my dissertation, which I did at the University of Chicago way back when. And she was very popular. I just want to respond to Peter's and Zehra's questions. She was very popular for people who wanted to study the Ottoman Empire in courses where we would teach gender, for instance. I mean, she was a very, very famous figure. And that century was also quite important because we had two amazing women who wrote on the Ottoman Empire. One was Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, the other was Elizabeth Craven, and she also has a very interesting memoir. And she's a traveler. So in that respect, I mean, two really interesting works. So I had questions, one to Zehra. I was wondering if Montagu actually has a place in the history of science, so not necessarily just in Turkey, but in general. Is she being taught as someone who facilitated this amazing
Not as far as
exchange?
I know. No.
No. So she has no place. Another to Joe, thank you very much for a really amazing presentation. I was wondering how the biography was received. So who are the readers? Is she popular in the UK or in academia at large?
I think academics
What
do seem
has
to be
the reception
studying
been
her now,
like?
which
Thank
I think
you.
obviously wasn't the case when my husband only studied her as a footnote of Alexander Pope. Now, you know, I gave a talk at the Oxford Literary Festival, and lots of the students came up and said, yes, I'm studying Montagu. Yeah, but I think most people in the street wouldn't necessarily know who she is. You know, I feel she should be as familiar to us in Britain as, say, Emily Bronte is, or Mary Shelley, somebody who kind of everybody kind of knows who that person is. And you don't really feel that with Montagu. So I would love it if she was better known. But, you know, the book has been well received, yes. It's wonderful to be here because I think that's a fantastic accolade to her.
Thank you, Wendy, Deputy Ambassador. I would just say that having graduated from medical school before joining the diplomatic service, we did actually learn about, when we learned about vaccination, we did actually learn about, well, Edward Jenner discovered inoculation using cowpox, but actually Lady Mary got there first. So she's not been completely forgotten in the scientific circles.
I felt I had to be very careful, actually, Wendy, because obviously Jenner, with vaccination, it is incredibly important. But in the book, I say he wouldn't have got to vaccination if we hadn't had inoculation. And that's a kind of important link that I don't think has really been stressed quite enough, somehow.
So, do you have another question for anyone? Yes, over here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this. I'm emotionally, I can say that I'm emotionally impressed by this. Because formerly I have studied women in Turkey in Ottoman Empire who actually paved the way for us to be strong in Turkey as women. Like Nezihe Muhittin, who is the first founder of the political women's organization in Turkey. Like she's like my idol in Turkey or Ottoman Empire. So while I was just reading about their story, like Ottoman Empire's women's movement, it was so emotional for me. So I would like to understand your emotional voyage while you are actually serving for the rebirth of Lady Mary, right? At least in Turkey, because I did not know before. That's sad for me. For sure I'm going to dig in information, further information about her. But yeah, I would like to ask your emotional voyage while you are discovering her, information in the past or in history. Thank you.
Well, I fell in love with her pretty quickly, as you can tell, because I started reading her letters, and you must read his Turkish embassy letters if you haven't, because they're just so fresh and so interesting. And there's a great one in there which you will love, where she goes to a hammam. and she's got on her riding habit with her stays, and it's very, very hot. And the women say to her, obviously she can't understand what she's saying. She did learn Turkish, but she didn't at that point. And they said, well, why don't you take your dress off? And she lifted it up, and there's this cage. And she says, but they must have thought I was the one who was repressed. Which is, so much of it speaks to us today, which is fantastic. So, no, she's a fantastic woman. And I was admitting to the others that I found it quite hard when I then went on to write about Sarah Siddons, who's also a wonderful woman, but she doesn't have quite that amazing out-there personality that Lady Mary always had. So do get reading her, definitely.
So that actually marks the end of our panel then. So it has whet the appetite, I think, for more discussions. So if you would like to learn more about Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, then I'd like to invite you to the British Institute at Ankara tomorrow, which is at Atatürk Boulevard, for an exclusive Turkish launch of Jo's book. So the pioneering life of Mary Wortley Montagu, scientist and feminist. So it'll be the first launch in Turkey. Woo! And I don't know, yes. I know, that was that. So please do come along. And actually Jo will be joined as well by Professor Mine Özyurt Kılıç from Ankara Sosyal Bilimler University, Ankara Social Sciences University. So there will also be an opportunity to actually pick up a copy of the book as well. So please do come along.
I brought lots in my suitcase and I don't want to take any home, so please do.
Yes. To register for that, please do check the BIA's website, www.biaa.ac.uk. So please do have a check for that. So before we go on to enjoy our refreshments, I'd like to invite Jill Caldicott, Country Director for the British Council in Turkey, and Dr. Luchtharde van der Put, Director of the British Institute at Ankara, to the stage.
These are just really a very few closing words and huge thank you. First of all, Peter, thank you so much for your moderation. And I want to express my gratitude to our two speakers, Jo Willett and Professor Dr. Zehra Sayers. I should also say thank you to the audience. You've been a wonderful audience, both in the room, and I know we've had a very significant online audience as well. So thank you so much for joining. This has been a partnership, perhaps the first and hopefully not the last of many, between British Embassy, BIAA, British Institute, and the British Council. And to make this event happen has been really fun. And I'd like to thank both the Embassy colleagues, represented by Deputy Ambassador Wendy Wyver especially, and BIA team led by Dr. Luchtharde van der Put. So thank you for that wonderful collaboration. And of course, many thanks to my British Council team who've helped make this happen, who've made it happen. Thank you. If as an audience you'd like to keep in touch on events and projects of this nature, or in education or arts, other types of projects, then please stay in touch, look at our websites, and please do enjoy the reception. But before we go, let me hand over to Dr. Luchtharde van der Put.
In the name of the BIA, I would like to add my thanks to the Embassy for hosting this event, and to the speakers for the engaging discussion, as well to Dr. Peter Cherry, who as a comparative literature specialist working on gender issues was the ideal moderator, I think, for this panel. The idea for this event was the outcome of a lunch between Jill, Peter and myself, but it's only because the Embassy took it on and took it on board that we were able to realize it, and I would like to extend a special thanks to Gary Benham and his team. I know he's somewhere here, but many at the British Council also worked tirelessly to make it happen, for which our thanks, especially to Çağla Selçuk, Özlem Ergün, and Mirel Akdemir. While the setting here at the residence is perfect for this event, we have also been fortunate to invite people around the world to join on Zoom. None of this would have been possible without the continued involvement of Dr. Hakan Tarhan, there, postdoctoral fellow at the British Institute, and Özlem Özdoğan, who is also somewhere here, who made sure that from the BIA side, the event reached the eyes and ears of the right people, the right audience. Now, Mary Wortley Montagu lived in the 18th century, but her open-mindedness and refusal to live by the conventions of her time are still an example to all of us today. And it doesn't matter whether you are female or male, I think, here. Without further ado, let us raise a glass to Mary Montagu and all women who pushed and push against boundaries. Thank you very much for being here.